Hello students, welcome back. Myself Pushpender Singh and we are going to start with the NCERT class 7th history. All right, and today you will have the third class for NCERT class 7th history, and we are continuing with our last class. All right, so let's begin with the class. All right, so let's understand the rulers and the builders. All right, so rulers and the builders which basically built many architectural, right, and many such features in the medieval time, right? All right, so first of all, you might have heard about the Qutub Minar, right? The Qutub Minar. So the Qutub Minar, if you see the figure, right, the figure basically shows that the balcony of the Qutub Minar was basically having, some sort of the arches and the geometric designs, right, which is basically noticeable. So the balcony, the pattern which is created over there has certain geometric and small arches. And the Qutubuddin Aibak basically constructed the Qutub Minar in 1199 AD. All right, now if you see in the Qutub Minar very closely, you would see that there are the two bands of inscriptions. So inscriptions are basically written down on some hard surfaces, like on the solid surfaces or on the metal surfaces, right? So these two bands of the inscriptions were basically under the balcony. They are written in the Arabic language. All right, and if you see the surface of this, the Qutub Minar, you also know that it is curved and it is angular also. Now to make such surface and to make such inscriptions on the Qutub Minar, you need the greater skill, right? And you need the greater precision, right? And it is not possible for the ordinary craft person to build, right, such structure with such great precision. So it is a performed act of the skilled craft person. That is definitely we can infer from this basically minar. All right, and you have lot of other buildings which is made up of stone and the bricks. All right, let's understand the difference between the 8th and the 18th century, right? The kings and the officers basically, different type of kings basically built a different type of structure, right? So let's understand what are the difference between those structures. So first of all, they are basically built two types of structures, basically two types of structures. So the first type of structure, you can say that it is basically the forts, palaces, and the garden residence and the tombs. They are basically those places which are basically the places of the rest, right? So where the people can basically safe, they can stay there, they can live over there. Okay, and there are the other places which are meant for the public activities. The public activities may be like performing the puja, right, offering certain the sacrifice. So those places may be the temples, mosque, tanks may have certain type of sacred, the values, the wells, and etc. And you may also have some of the bazaars where public activities may be performed. Okay, now the kings are supposed to take care of their subjects. First of all, how the king can take care of their subjects, right? The king can take care of their subjects by, first of all, by giving them certain donations, right? By giving them money, by giving them land grants. Apart from that, the king can also help them by making structures also, isn't it? These structures would be used by this common public, right? And why the kings used to make these structures? To win the heart of these people, right? In order to ensure that these people are with the king. And you must understand, the few of those construction activities are performed by the king or by the orders of the king, but few of those construction activities are also performed by some of the the craft persons, right? And which are basically donated by the merchants. So basically the merchants also contributed in the building of temples, mosques, right, which are in the public in the nature, right? And you must also understand there are large mansions also, right, which hardly survived, right? Right, you must understand they would have barely survived from 18th century, right? Previously those structures were there, they hardly survived. All right, Then, as I told you, that it needed basically some sort of engineering skills and the constructions for making such grand splendor, the architecture. So the monuments which basically built under different kingdoms, they are basically having the greatest technological skill for the construction. Like for example, the roofs of the temples or the roofs of basically the forts, which are made up of first of all, they're made up of slabs of the stones, right? Now you need basically some sort of a placing of the wooden beams or the slab of the stones across these four walls in order to make the roof much more cylindrical or much more tomb like, right? So it is also the artifact of technology, right? Isn't it? And it is very, very difficult to make such a large room, right, with such elaborate superstructure. If you enter into the if you enter into any fort, or if you enter, right, in any structure of the temple, you would find that there is a very very big superstructure, and behind that there you will have the big large room. How would you construct them? So you need a sophisticated skills. You need the wooden beams, right, across these four walls, and that technology was very sophisticated on that time. And between the 7th and the 10th century, the architects started adding more rooms, doors, and the windows to the buildings, right? So it has given certain other aspects of aesthetic looking, right, other aspects like ventilation and other phenomena in the buildings also, right? Now the roofs, doors, windows were still made up of you know uh, you know by placing a horizontal beam across two vertical columns. All right. Now this style of architecture, right, which is made by replacing a horizontal beam across two vertical columns, is basically a style of architecture which is also known as the Trebiate architecture or cobalt architecture. All right. And between 8th and the 13th century, this tribute style of architecture or cobalt style of architecture was basically started using in the construction of the temples or the mosque. All right. Now, now the technology of for this development of this, the grand splendor of construction of the temple, but basically started noticeable from 12th century onward. Okay. Now, if you see those structures, you would find that the weight of the superstructure, which is in a dome shape, right, or which is having the heavy superstructure above the doors and the windows, are sometime carried by the arches. So you have the arch like, the superstructure. And this architectural form, which is in the form of arches, are also known as arcuate type of architecture. All right. And to make this arcuate type of architecture, you need basically the cement also, right? So the limestone cement was started increasingly using in the construction, right, from 12th century onward. And this high class cement, which was basically used just like a concrete, the concrete you make by mixing the high quality cement, right, with the fine the ingredient with coarse ingredient with water. So just like that, the high quality concrete is also made up of the high quality cement. When you mix it up with the fine aggregates, the coarse aggregate, and which is basically placed on the proper footing, then it will become more hardened and it will convert it into the structure. All right. And such structure of the large size can be easily built up of this by the use of this the limestone cement. All right. Now, building of temples, mosque, and the temples. So first of all, you must understand why kings were started building these temples, mosque, and the tanks. This is the question, it is flashing in your mind. Why the kings used to build it? So first of all, you must understand these places are associated with the worship. These places are associated with the place of worship. So they were beautifully constructed because the people used to go and they used to worship in those places. And moreover, the second most important aspect is the king or the kingdom used to project strength, the power, right, through these temples, right? And also the king tried to project, right, them as a descendant of the king also, isn't it? Oh, so it is basically a devotion of the patron. So for example, if you visit the Raja Rajeshwara temple, right, an inscription which is mentioned in the temple, it is says that it is built by the king, right, for the worship of God. So first of all, you must understand, in the Raja Rajeshwara temple, the god name is Raja Rajeshwaram, and the king name is Raja Deva. So you see here, the ruler also named just like a god. So both of the name, right? The king name is Raja Deva, and the god's name is Raja Rajeshwaram. So it most almost looks similar. So why? So because so God, the kings both basically want to associate with the god, right? First of all, to associate it with the name of the god is auspicious, and it is also looks like as if it is appear like a god, right? So the kings want to associate it with the places of worship. The kings want to project their strength, their wealth, right? And they want to inherit those names which also look similar to the names of god, so that they can also be appear just like a god. All right. And as I told you that there were various rituals of the worships also performed in those temples. So these temples are also used for those performing of those rituals like sacrifices, right? And the largest temples, generally, for example, there are multiple temples in a kingdom. All right. So the largest among the temples would be constructed by the king. And you must understand, right, in those temple, or there may be small a few temples, right? These temples are also consisting of the gods and the goddess, but these gods and the goddess belongs to, or they are associated with, the allies and the subordinates of the ruler. So that means the largest of those temples were constructed by the kings, and other temples, right, or other lesser deities are also there, which may be associated with the subordinates of the ruler. Okay. And you must understand, the temple was a miniature model of the world, which is ruled by the king. For example, king himself used to worship their deities, right, in the temples, right? It seems that as if it brought just rule of the god on the earth. So it is a miniature form, it is a miniature model of the world ruled by the king, isn't it? So as if it is looking like as if the rule of the god is on the earth. All right. And you must understand, the Muslim sultans and the padshahs, both of them did not claim that they are the incarnations of the god, but there are the Persian chronicles, or the Persian courts, basically, which describe the sultan as a shadow of god, the shadow of god, which basically also led to, right, the demonstration or projection of the sultans as a shadow of god, just like Indian rulers also project themselves as a descendant of god, right? For example, inscription in a mosque, which is also known as Kuwat al-Islam Mosque. So an inscription in this mosque is clearly explained that regarding Alauddin Khilji, that the Alauddin Khilji was the king because he has certain qualities of the great lawgivers. For example, these great lawgivers are basically the Moses and Solomon. So these Moses and the Solomons are the greatest lawgivers in the past, and the Alauddin has the qualities which is inherited from this the highest great lawgivers, which basically present in the past. So the Alauddin Khilji architect was, the god himself, isn't it? And the god himself created the world out of chaos, and for introducing this order and the symmetry, he basically placed the Alauddin Khilji, isn't it? And you must also understand, each of these dynasties which basically ruled wherever, right, they basically try to emphasize on their moral right to rule. For example, if a dynasty is ruling in XYZ place, it basically try to reinforce, right, and try to reinforce, that belief system, that it has the moral right to rule that place, right? So in order to enforce, in order to reinforce that belief, right, they basically construct the places of the worship like temples, isn't it? So so these temples basically give the chances to get associated with the god, right? So you must understand, especially in those times when political changes was taking place, associating with the god is a great aspect. And moreover, you must understand, the rulers often offered patronage to those, the learned, right, persons, right? For example, the Brahmins, especially, like the pious persons, right, in their capitals. And slowly these cities started converting into the great cultural centers, isn't it? And once these great cultural centers has started forming, it gave the great fame to the rulers, first of all, because how the city basically converted, or the capital converted into the cultural center, it has given the greater fame to the ruler also, isn't it? So that is also one of the important aspect of promoting this the places of the worship, isn't it? And you must understand, the Sultan Iltutmish, right, he basically constructed a large reservoir outside Delhi Khulna, right? And by constructing this large reservoir, he won a universal respect, right? And this reservoir is known as Hauze Sultani, or the King's Reservoir. All right. And just like the temples, the rulers also used to construct just like the tanks, right? And the reservoirs, these are used by the people. So just like the temples, which are used by the people, the tanks are also used by the people also, right? Which are basically, gave lot of respect to the people. All right. And these tanks and the reservoir are part of the temple, okay? And the mosque or the gurudwaras, whatever be the place of the worship, sometimes these tanks are also there, right? And is also related to the significance of the kingdom in which they are located. All right. And the next question is coming in your mind, that why in the medieval period of the time, why the temples are destroyed? So as I told you, the temples are destroyed because, first of all, you need to go back that the king built the temples, right, to demonstrate their devotion to the god. First thing is that. Second thing is that the kings also wanted to project their power, their wealth, isn't it? So if any king or any ruler want to capture the another land or another distinct kingdom, the first thing the invader would do, invader would attack the most, the most identifiable, those places which also synonym the, the power, the splendor, the wealth of the person, or wealth of the kingdom. So it basically destroyed those, the power projection. First of all, in turn, the temples were also destroyed, right? For example, the Pandyan king, which was also known as the Shimara Shri Vallabha, right? He basically a king in 9th century. He basically invaded Sri Lanka. All right. And he basically defeated the king, which is also known as Sena first. So he defeated the king, and a Buddhist, basically a monk, which basically noted that the statue of the Buddha was basically removed, right? So it removed basically the most valuable items which were there on the statue of the Buddha, right? So it was in the jewel place, and the golden place images were there in the Western monasteries. All were basically seized by this Pandyan king. So what was there? So it was ruled by, so this, the Sri Lanka king was basically a Sinhalese ruler. So this Singhali ruler, they lost their pride. They lost their pride, so they want to avenge the lost pride, right? Isn't it? So the next Singhali ruler, which is also known as Sena II, ordered, right, to invade the Madurai, which is also the capital of Pandya. The point was basically, right, to expedite the effort to find out and restore the gold statue of the Buddha, which was plundered by the Pandya's king when the Pandya king basically invaded the Lanka king, right, or the Sri Lanka. All right. And similarly was happened when the Chola king, that was Rajendra I, built a Shiva temple in his capital. And you must understand, he filled it with some sort of a prized statues which is seized from the defeated rulers, right? So he basically, uh, in the temple in which he constructed, the temple was itself has some of the statues which are seized from the defeated rulers. For example, a sun pedestal was basically brought from the Chalukyas. The Ganesha statues and several statues of the Durgas were also brought. The Nandi statue were also brought from Eastern Chalukyas. Okay, the images of the Bhairava was brought from the Kalingas of Orissa, isn't it? The images of Bhairavi was also brought from the Kalingas of Orissa. The Kali statue were also brought from the Palas of Bengal. So all such statues were basically, were brought, after defeating the ruler. So all such things basically shows that such things were very common, not only during the Sultanate time, but also during the ancient time also. And it is not associated with any religion, right? Every religion, every religious, the invaders have does this type of task of plundering, looting, and destroying the temples which was there in the ancient period of the time. And this is also true in terms of the Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, right? The Sultan Mahmud of the Ghazni, who was attacking the various temples, right? So and this Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, why is attacking the temples? Because he want to take the credit of becoming a hero of Islam, of destroying the temples, especially the Somnath temple, which was destroyed by the Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni. So he just want to take the credit, and he was not the most important ruler at that time, but by taking this credit, he want to become a hero. And you must also understand, right? These temples are basically displayed their political might, the military success, right? All such rulers, by attacking and looting these places of worship, they basically project their political might and military success, right? And let's understand the gardens, tombs, and the forts. So first of all, under Mughals, right, the architecture was more complex. For example, you might have heard that during the Mughal period of the time, the Mughals were basically more interested in the art, they are more interested in the literature, they are more interested in the architecture. So their architecture, the literature, their art were basically more fascinating. And you must understand, in his biography also, in his autobiography also, right, he basically started, or has the planning or interest in basically introducing the gardens, right, with rectangular walled enclosures. So these gardens were basically divided into four such quarters, right? And they were basically divided by artificial channels. So if you take any garden, if you divide into four quarters, what would you say? That type of garden is basically, a separate set of architecture, which is also known as the charbagh architecture, right? Because that garden is consisting of now charbagh, or four gardens, right? So it is a symmetrical division into four quarters, For example, this place, you have first of all, laying of these, rectangular walled enclosures just like this, and you have divided into four quarters, right? Isn't it? And they were basically divided by these artificial channels, isn't it? These were basically are called the charbagh type of gardens, and these were basically very famous during the Mughal period of the time. And even when the Akbar came, right, some of the most beautiful charbaghs which were constructed by the Jahangir Sanja, right, also be there in the Agra, Kashmir, and Delhi also, right? And not only for that, right, it is also make the, inspiration for the other rulers also. All right. And for example, the central towering dome, right? When you see the important Mughal architecture, for example, when you visit the Humayun's tomb or Humayun ka Maqbara, you would find that the central dome, right, which is also has the great, the tall gateways, is an important aspect of Mughal architecture. So this towering dome and the gateways are also the important Mughal architecture. And the tomb was basically placed in the center of a formal charbagh, which was basically the symmetrically division of the basically the bagh into 4 quarters, isn't it? And this was basically a tradition that the tradition was known as 8 paradise, right? So 8 paradise means the central hall is nothing but surrounded by the 8 rooms. So this was also a tradition during the Mughal architecture. And the buildings which were constructed during the Mughal period of the time, they were constructed by the red sandstone, right? The white marble, right? And you must also understand, uh, right? You must also understand that huge amount of construction activities, right, also happened in the Agra, Delhi, and southern certain other places also. And there were many ceremonial halls also built. They are also called diwane khas or diwane am. These ceremonial halls were basically used for the public or private audiences. They were very carefully planned, very carefully planned. And they were placed as a large courtyard, and these courts were often described as a chihil sutun or 40 pillared halls where the public and the private audiences taken place. All right. And the Shahjahan's audience halls, they were specially constructed to resemble just like a mosque, right? So these audience halls, which is basically a center where the people can listen to the to the emperor, they just like resemble just like a mosque. And you must also understand the pedestal on which the Shahjahan used to sit, right, or the pedestal on which the throne used to be placed, right? It is also frequently described as a qibla. So qibla का मतलब क्या होता है? Qibla means the direction in which the devotees basically face, face during the prayer. For example, if they perform namaz in the mosque, so what they do, they basically face their head towards a particular direction, towards the god. So here the king, here the ruler himself used to sit on the pedestal, right, which is also the synonymous to the, or which is also resembled to the mosque, and which is also a reflection of the fact that the idea of the king, which is also considered as a representative of the king, right, which was also suggested by different architectural features, isn't it? So that is the reason such pedestal was made, right, during this audience halls also. And you must also understand, if you see the emperor's throne, right, there was series of the Pita Durga, right? So this Pita Durga was inlaid by, depicted by the legendary Greek god Ophes, which is playing a lute, right? And you must also understand that the construction of this audience hall, right, it was the main purpose of construction of this audience hall is to basically communicate the to the basically to the people, to the citizens, right, the kings, regarding the king's justice, right, isn't it? And it is also to project that in the eyes of the king, right, or in the eyes of the king, there is no such inequality, right? There is no such high and the low. Everyone is equal, and everyone can live together harmoniously in the reign of the king. And you must also understand, in the early years of the reign, if you just compare the Shahjahan, the capital was built at Agra, isn't it? But you must understand why this capital was built on the banks of the river Yamuna, right? And there was set of the formal gardens also, right, which were constructed in the charbagh format. But there were many reasons for this, right? So there was no such dwellings which were located in the middle of this charbagh, right, but at the edges, which is the close to the bank of the river. So there is no such constructions which is located in the middle of the charbagh. And also they are also described as the riverfront garden, right? The Shahjahan basically adopted this riverfront garden in the layout of Taj Mahal, which is also the one of the grandest architectural accomplishment of these regions. And you must understand that the white marble mausoleum which was placed, right, by the edge of this river and the garden to the south, right, why the Shahjahan was deployed this architectural form, right, to make the white marble mausoleum placed on the terrace, right, by the edge of the river, and it is garden on the to the south. Why it is basically placed? So it is basically placed to control the access of the nobles that had to be to the river. So the Saja want to control the access of the nobles, isn't it? To control the access of the nobles, this form of the architecture, or this form of the architectural form, was adopted by the Saja, right? Only the special favored nobles, like his eldest son, who was also known as Dara Sukho, were given, the access to control the river, right? Were given to access to control the river. Otherwise, others were not given the access to control the river. And you must also understand that to construct the home, right, you have to take the permission from the king, and you are basically not allowed to construct those homes, right, in between those river Yamuna, or nearby river Yamuna, but to away from the river Yamuna, right? Let's understand the construction activity, which has increased between 8th and the 18th century, right? So you must understand these construction activities has increased between 8th and 18th century, and it is basically, sharing the ideas of across regions, because the construction activities have increased, the empire has increased, right? The tradition of one region has adopted by the another region, so it has also started adopting the different features which is also there in the distinct land. For example, in the Vijayanagar, the elephant stables of the rulers were strongly influenced by the style of the adjoining the sultanates of Bijapur and the Golconda, isn't it? If you visit in the Vrindavan region near Mathura, the temples which are constructed in the Vrindavan, right, it is basically influenced by the architectural styles which is very similar to the Mughals in the Fatehpur Sikri, isn't it? And if you visit some other places, they will also resemble, right, to those architecture which is related to those, native places, right? And you must also understand the Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting the regional architectural styles, right, in the construction of their own buildings. So to integrate those, the regional styles in the construction of their own architectural form, the Mughal rulers were particularly skilled. For example, in the Bengal, the local rulers had developed the roof, right? So that roof was basically designed to resemble the thatched hut, isn't it, in the Bengal? And this Mughal basically liked this Bangla dome. So they used this in their architecture. Which is nothing but a Bengal form of architecture, which is resembled a thatched hut. So the Mughals started adapting this regional architectural styles, right? And impact of other regions were also evident. For example, if you visit the Fatehpur Sikri, which is the Akbar's capital, right, which also shows the influence of the architectural styles of Gujarat and the Malwa, right? Certain features have adopted by the Akbar also. And you must also understand that the authority of the Mughal rulers wanted to establish in the 8th century the architectural designs that were developed, right, which were started developing and keep on developing even after the Mughals also, right? So they were further adapted by the another rulers also. Let's understand the towns, traders, and the craft persons also. So first of all, if you visit just like a traveler, and if you visit any medieval town, right, what would you find? You would find the towns. There are varieties of the towns. For example, you would find the temple town, you will find an administrative center, you will find a commercial town, you will find a port town, isn't it? So you will find the different types of town, right? And you must also understand, right, there were many such towns also which perform different type of functions, right? For example, right, if some of those towns which were performing the administrative functions also, the temple functions also, right, some of the commercial activities also, the craft productions also. So there were many such functions were performed by the towns also. So one by one we will be looking at the different centers. For example, the first is basically administrative center. So the classic example is Tanjavur. So Tanjavur was the capital of Chola, right? And it was basically 1,000 years ago, right? And you must understand the Kaveri river used to flow near this Tanjavur town, isn't it? And you must also understand that Raja Rajeshwara temple, which was also built by the king Raja, which was also a Chola ruler, isn't it? And you must also understand that the town people, right? The town people was also then praising for this architect, which was also known as Raja, right? Pattachuman, which was also proudly carved out his name on the temple's wall. And inside this temple, which has the massive Shivalinga, isn't it? And there were many such places with the mandapa and the pavilions, right? What is the use of these mandapas? The king generally used to hold the courts in this mandapas, right? So the kings used to hold the court, and king used to give the orders, right, to their subordinates. Their subordinates used to meet. So all such courts were used to held in these mandapas. And there were other, places like barracks for the army also. So they were basically mainly administrative centers. Administrative centers means they were mainly held for the administration purpose. All right. The town, which is also known as Tanjavur, is basically, having the, the marketplace also. For example, this Tanjavur is also selling the grains, spices, clothes, and the jewelry also, right? It also, the water supply for the town comes from the wells and the tanks at that period of the time, isn't it? And you must also understand that it is producing cloth for flags, right, which is basically used in the temple, right? It is also the fine cottons were produced for the kings, for the nobilities. The coarse cottons were produced, right, for the masses. So such weavers were also present of the Tanjavur, isn't it? There were many exquisite, the bronze idols, the ornamental bell metal lamps were also produced in the Tanjavur, isn't it? Next is temple towns or pilgrimage centers. Okay, now the Tanjavur can be an example of the temple town also, right? And you must understand the temple town. So it is a town. So it is a representing the pattern of urbanization, right? So the pattern of urbanization means it is a process by which the city is basically developed, right? For example, if the city which is at the heart of the city, the temple are there. Okay, so temple is the center of economy or the society. So when you say the temple town means the town's economic development, the society's development is because of the temple. Because of the temple, so temple is at center of the economy. Okay. Now, what is the use of this temple and how this economy of this, the town is dependent on the temple? Because rulers built this temple to demonstrate the devotion to various deities. Now, these temples would endowed with lot of grants of the land also, and lot of money also to carry out different rituals, isn't it? To feed pilgrims, to feed priests, to culminate or to celebrate certain festivals, right? The pilgrims used to come to that place and they used to offer, they used to give lot of donations, isn't it? So such type of towns basically grows in the size because of the essence of, or because of the quality of getting the more pilgrimages into the temple town. Now these temple towns or the authorities which basically ruled the temple, they use this wealth which is collected out of endowment or the donations to finance trade and the banking in the town. So that money will be used for financing the trade and the banking, right? And slowly and over the period of the time, since there were many temples, right, and these temples, the number of priests were also there. So gradually the number of priests, workers, artisans, traders also started growing, right, nearby temples. Because once the temple started growing, the economy also started growing. So there is the forward and the backward linkages also grows. And because of that, lot of other the peasant artisans and traders also started catering to their services also, and they started their services to different needs of those pilgrims also. So that is how the towns basically grow, and these towns basically become a temple towns. Now these towns are also known as, for example, Vidisha in the Madhya Pradesh, Somnath in the Gujarat is because of the Somnath temple, isn't it? Other temple towns are Kanchipuram, the Madurai temple in Madurai in Tamil Nadu, isn't it? Tirupati in the Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh, it is famous because of Tirupati temple, right? The main activities is basically pilgrimage, right? So it is the center, is the main source of economic development of the city, isn't it? For example, Brindaban in the Uttar Pradesh is also temple town. The Tiruvannamalai in the Tamil Nadu is also temple town, isn't it? So I hope it is clear. Okay. Even the Ajmer is also temple town. For example, the Ajmer is basically the capital of Chauhan's Rajputs, which basically ruled in 12th century, right? So later the Ajmer also became the Suba headquarters of the Mughal. But you must understand the Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, right? Who was also the Sufi saint, who basically settled in the 12th century, right? In the Ajmer, and because of that, the Ajmer is also revered as a basically the most important Sufi site, also as a Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, isn't it? And which attract, thousands or even lakhs of the devotees from all religions. And nearby Ajmer also you have the Pushkar Lake, right? The Pushkar is also having the religious significance, so which also attracted a lot of pilgrims from ancient times also, right? Since ancient time, even now itself, the Pushkar Lake, the Pushkar fair is very, very famous. Even the foreigners used to visit this Pushkar fair nearby Ajmer in the Rajasthan region. All right. Then you have the network of the small towns also. For example, these networks of the small towns basically dotted with the several small towns. So all such continents having small towns. Now, these small towns maybe probably emerge from the villages, maybe from the larger villages, isn't it? Now, they usually had a madapika, which is also known as mandi. So they usually have the mandi because once you have the number of villages, the villagers used to bring their produce to the nearby mandi. So the largest village may be converted into a small town where this mandi is located, isn't it? Where the farmers used to brought their produce. So over the period of the time, because of this mandi, the largest village may be converted to small town, isn't it? And that market will also have, for example, a hard may, for example, a local market or the market street, which also have the significance in terms of the small towns. Okay. And which will also have the lines of the shops and different types of other other kind of artisans will also be there over there. All right. So this will also have led to the tremendous significance of the towns, all right. And and you must also understand, since the towns are not without the traders is always at the the lifeblood of these towns. So traders used to be there. They travel from the one town to another town. They came from the distant land, and they came to with their produce to sell those products to the distant land, right? For example, they used to sell the horses, salt, camphor, right? The nuts, spices like pepper, etc., isn't it? So there were many traders who basically used to move, right? So these traders may be the big and the small, right? So there were many kind of traders. For example, one such trader was given in the book is basically called Banjaras. Okay, so these Banjaras are basically the horse traders. Okay, so they were basically several traders. They basically form an association, right, with the headmen. Okay, so these horse traders basically used to negotiate, right, with the warriors, because who need the horses for the fighting in the war, isn't it? And there were another people also who used to move in the caravans, right? And they form basically guild. So caravans are basically, or the guild is basically an association of those traders basically. And there were many such guilds which were very famous in the southern India, which was also famous in the 8th century onward. And the most famous is basically the Manigram or Nana Desi, right, which was the most famous such guilds, right, which were there. And these guilds were associated with extensive nature of trading activities, right, within the peninsula, or even outside the peninsula, even outside the country also, with the Southeast Asia and the China also, isn't it? And there were many such communities also apart from this guild. For example, Chetiyars and Marwadi community, right? These Marwadis and the Chetiyar you can find anywhere, right? For example, Marwadi communities has completely taken over the markets of the Gujarat. You see, go over there are only Marwadis over there, right? So go to the Maharashtra, go to the Andhra Pradesh, go to the Tamil Nadu, Marwadis are everywhere. Okay, they have completely controlled the market economy of the states. All right. Just like that, you have also the Muslim, you have just like a Hindu baniyas, right? So you have just like a Muslim bohras also who were trading on that period of the time, right? So they basically extensively traded across the port of Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the China. So they were basically, different, the traders who used to perform, right? These, trading activities across, to the lands. All right. And they used to sold different type of items, for example, textiles, the spices, right? And for example, the textiles and the spices were of greater use or greater demand in some of the Western countries, right? And in exchange, they basically brought the gold and the ivory from the Africa, isn't it? They basically brought the Chinese blue pottery, the silver from Southeast Asia and the China in return of this textile and the basically spices, isn't it? And even the towns on the western coast of India is also, right, home to the different traders. For example, Arab traders were there, Persian traders were there, Chinese traders were there, Jewish traders, and Syrian Christian traders were also there, right? And as I told you that Indian spices, just like a pepper, cardamom, they were very famous, right? They were extensively purchased by the Italian traders. And the clothes, the Indian Muslim clothes were very famous, and it was basically sold in the Red Sea port, which is purchased by the Italian traders. And this eventually leads to the Eurasian markets, right, or European markets, and which is fetching the very high profits, right? The tropical climates, different type of species like pepper, cardamom, right, ginger, dried ginger, they are very important, right, part of the cooking or European cooking. Even the cotton clothes were very attractive in the European market. So this eventually, draw the attention of the European traders to India, and ultimately India exported these items to the Europe in the ancient period of the time. Let's understand the craft in the towns. So as I told you, that the craft persons are very skillful. Okay, so they basically inlay a lot of, the skillful work, isn't it? So for example, if you visit the weather region or the craft persons of the weather region, right, they have, famed for their inlay work on the copper, on the silver, right? So they are called bidri, they are called bidris, right? Just like that, you have the Vishwakarma community. This Vishwakarma community consisting of the various, the smiths, for example, the goldsmiths, bronze smiths, blacksmiths, mansions, and the carpenters, which are essential for building the temples. Okay, so this Vishwakarma community is basically associating with construction of the temple, isn't it? And they were also important role in construction of the places, big buildings, tanks, and reservoirs also, isn't it? If you see the closer look, right, for example, if you see, for example, the Surat, or you say Hampi, the Hampi is basically located in the Krishna Tungabhadra basin. So Krishna is a river, Tungabhadra is also a river. So in this basin, the Hampi town is located, right? So it is a nucleus of Vijayanagar kingdom or Vijayanagar empire. This Hampi town was founded in 1336. Okay, so here you must understand, it was a well fortified city. It was a well fortified city, which was fortified, or which was founded by the Vijayanagar empire, right? But you must understand, there were no such cementing agent was used in the construction of these walls of the temples, right? And there were only some techniques which were used, right, which were basically used by interlocking of different type of wedges. So in that term, when you don't use basically the cementing agent or the mortar, you are making such a marvelous and a splendid architecture without such cementing agent is itself is a distinctive feature, right? So which is also a good, architectural performance. And such royal complexes had the splendid arches, domes, and pillared hulls, right? For holding such sculptures also will be present over there. Okay, and over the period of the time, this Hampi town, right, in the 15th and the 16th centuries, right, it converted into commercial and the cultural town also, right? So it converted into commercial and the cultural towns. And you must also understand that there were different peoples. For example, the Moors, which were collectively known as the Muslim merchants, Chettis, right, and different agents of the European traders, right, which basically, used to come and visit these markets of the Hampi on that period of the time. So you can visit, or you can assume that the type of commercial activities or the cultural activities that were performed, right, in the markets of the Hampi, isn't it? So they were basically the temples that were there in the Hampi that were has, the hub of cultural activities. Like lot of temple dancers, which are called the Devdasis, used to perform the dance, isn't it, before the deities, isn't it? And you have, some form of the pillared halls also formed in those temples. Okay, and the south is also splendid in terms of the architecture also. For example, during the Navratri, the Mahanavami festival was basically celebrated. It is the most important festival which was celebrated at Hampi. Okay, and the Mahanavami platform was also found, right, where the king used to receive the guest. From this platform, the king used to receive the guest. Okay, and the king used to accept the tribute from the subordinate chiefs. Okay, from this platform, right? So you must understand, and that is how the splendid, the architectural feature of the Hampi was basically described. And ultimately, at the end, the Hampi fell into ruins, right? Right after the empire was, the defeat of the Vijayanagar Empire by the Deccani Sultans, right? So these Deccani Sultans were basically rulers of Golconda, Bijapur, and Ahmednagar, Berar, and the Bidar. So these are combined, are called Deccani Sultans. So they were basically, the more stronger empires, more stronger sultans, which defeated this Vijayanagar Empire, and that the Hampi was basically fell into the ruins in 1565 AD. All right. If you see the few places which were also known as the gateways to the west, for example, Surat. Surat is located in the Gujarat. Okay, the Surat was the most important trading spot, right, to trade with the Western, some of the few, the Middle East countries. For example, the Western trade during the Mughal period used to happen through, through the Cambay, or the Gulf of Cambay, or Gulf of Khambar, right? And it was later shifted to the Ahmedabad, and that is why the Surat is also known as the gateway to the West Asia and the Gulf of Hormuz, right? And the Surat is also known as the gate to the Mecca, because through this port, the various traders used to come and enter into the trading practices with India. And the city was having the cosmopolitan, right? So people, from different castes, different religions used to live over there. Okay, and not only the people, right, but also the some of the peoples belongs to the Portuguese, belong to Dutch, belong to English, used to, construct their factories, right, their warehouses at the Surat for this, practicing this trade with the Indian merchants. All right. And and you must also understand, there were various chronicles also which says that there were several retail and the wholesale shops, right? They used to sell the cotton textiles, right? The textiles of the Surat were very famous, right? And these famous for gold lace borders, which are also known as zari, right? So these textiles are known as zari because it has the gold lace borders, and it has the great market in the Western Asia, in the Africa, and the Europe through the Surat. And you have, the innumerous number of people, right, which basically trade with this, with those items. And also, there are many such, the buildings which were constructed during this period. For example, the Kathiawar Seths, or the merchants, or the Mahajans, used to give lot of money for constructing of certain magnificent buildings and innumerable these pleasure parks for stocking this huge amount of money, or for performing this banking, right, business in the Surat. So that is how the Surat town was basically flourished, right? And one more important point is the Surat Hundis, right? So Surat Hundis were basically honored in the far off markets, especially in the Egypt, and especially in the Iraq and Belgium, right? So there were some of the few features where the Surat has tremendous linkages with the far west. Okay, and why this Surat has lost the market? Because you must understand, because of the decline of the Mughal Empire. Okay, So loss of market productivity is due to the loss of the decline of the Mughal Empire. The control of the sea lanes or sea routes were also, also, led by the Portuguese, right, from the Mughals, right, and also there were different competitors also, right, which brought from the distant region also. From, for example, the Bombay also have the port, right. So once this different port destinations occurred, the competition also increased, right. For example, in the Bombay, the East India Company basically shifted their headquarters, which is further, associating with the trade also. But today, even if you see, the Surat is a bustling commercial center, even today also. Okay, let's understand the Masulipatanam. The Masulipatanam is basically also known as Machilipatanam. It is a town, right? It is a town which is located on the delta of Krishna River, right? So it is basically a town where the both Dutch and the East India Company or English East India Company, right, try to control this town, right? So that is the reason it became the most important port on the Andhra coast, isn't it? The Dutch East India Company basically formed or constructed a fort at Masulipatanam, right? And the Qutub Shahi rulers of the Golconda imposed the monopolies on the sale of textiles, right, to prevent the sale of these, the textile spices through this port, right, through the hands of East India companies, and which has led to the further, the complication in the relationship between those Golconda rulers as well as with the Britishers, right, isn't it? And the fights competition also started begin between the different trading groups. For example, you have the Golconda nobles. One side you have the Persian merchants. Another side you have the Chetis from Telugu regions. European traders was there. Okay, they were more popular in terms of trading, right? So as soon as the Mughals try to expand their, the power to the Golconda, right, the governor was also, who was also a merchant, begin to play off the Dutch, because Dutch want to control this entire trade, isn't it? So Dutch want to play, right, this, the ruler of the Golconda against the East India Company, isn't it? And in that process, the Mughal Empire basically annexed the Golconda, and this caused the European companies to look for the alternative, because now the Mughal Emperor already annexed the Golconda. There is no other place to trade with those, with those locations. So the European companies were started forcing to look for other alternatives also. And this has led to the new policy or the development of the new policy, right, which is not enough, right, if the port has connections with the production centers of the hinterland. So this new company trade centers, it was felt, right, which should combine the political, administrative, and the commercial roles, and which will have the greater impact or greater impetus for the performance of the trade in these regions. Over the period of the time, the new towns and the traders were, formed because of the fierce competition among the traders. And in the 16th and the 17th century, right, the European countries or European traders were basically searching for the spices like cardamom, ginger, right, pepper, etc., and for the textiles also. They were very famous in the Europe and the Western Asia. The English East India Company, Dutch, and the French, right, they formed basically East India companies, right, in order to expand their commercial activities in the East, isn't it? And which has led to the further competition among those powers, and in between those powers, between the French, Dutch, and the English was ultimate winner. So English basically emerged as the most successful commercial and the political power in the Indian subcontinent, and that is why the English basically established the colonial rule on the Indian subcontinent, isn't it? And it is because, the initial phases, it was because of the textiles, the spices were of great demand, isn't it? So that has caused these East India companies to establish their bases at Indian subcontinent. Okay, and these were something related to traders. All right, so thank you very much for attending this session. So we have completed your third class of your class 7th history book. Okay, so we'll meet tomorrow. So thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you.